Good morning, students. We are on section 7.5, and we are going to be talking about trapezoids and kites today. So, what is a trapezoid? Well, you know what, a pen shows up. Pen shows up a little bit better. A trapezoid is a quadrilateral with only one pair of parallel sides. Quadrilateral with only one pair of parallel sides. So let's draw. There's two parallel sides. That is a trapezoid. Okay? And the bases of the trapezoid are the pair of parallel sides. So the bases are the pair of parallel sides. So the bases for this trapezoid would be this line and this line. Those would be the bases. Okay, if you were to do it. However, you're going to pick just one of them if you're going to do base angles. Typically, base angles are a pair of angles on one base. Pair of angles on one base. So, I lost my blue. Bummer. Pair of angles on one. So here's our base angles. This angle and this angle. So if we talk about our base angles, we're talking about those two. If this were upside down, we'd be talking about those two. But our base angles are never these two and never these two. It's a pair of angles on one base. So those are our base angles. Okay. And then the legs are the non-base segments, line segments. So the legs would be these two. Those would be the legs. So why don't you know what? I could just draw it each time. So here's our base. And then here's our base angles. And then if we want to know what our legs are, here's a leg, here's the leg. Okay, isosceles trapezoid. This one's cool. An isosceles trapezoid is a trapezoid with congruent legs. Trapezoid with congruent legs. So if we have our parallel lines, then this line and this line are equal. So an isosceles trapezoid is that right there. Now, one thing to keep in mind with an isosceles trapezoid is if the legs are congruent, if you have congruent, let's get a little bit more space. If you have congruent legs, then the base angles are congruent. So congruent legs on an isosceles trapezoid, not any trapezoid, just an isosceles trapezoid. On an isosceles trapezoid, the base angles are congruent. Base angles are congruent. So this equals this. Base angles are congruent on an isosceles trapezoid. Okay, now, so isosceles trapezoid, those base angles are congruent, and at the same time, those base angles are congruent. So isosceles trapezoid, the two base angles here are congruent, and the two base angles here are congruent. Okay. Let's see here. isosceles trapezoid, 3 diagonals are congruent. So that equals that. So the diagonals are congruent for an isosceles trapezoid. Okay. I think that's about that for isosceles trapezoid. For a trapezoid, the mid segment. Let's do that. Let's do the mid segment of a trapezoid. So mid segment of a trapezoid. If we have a trapezoid, I want to get into this. Let's go over here. If we have a trapezoid, and let's say this is 12, let's say this is 6 and 6, and this is 5 and 5. So that's the mid segment of this leg. That's the mid segment of this leg. If we connect the two mid segments, we connect the mid segment is parallel. So this is a trapezoid, right? The mid segment is parallel to those two, and the mid segment is 1/2 the length of both of the bases combined. So mid segment parallel to bases, and it is also half the length of the sum of the bases. So the mid segment is, the length is half of this plus this. Okay? All right. That is all we need to know about trapezoids. Pair of parallel sides. Base angles are the pairs of angles. The legs are the non-base segments. An isosceles trapezoid, the base angles are equal. Base angles are equal or congruent. Isosceles trapezoid has the legs are the same length. The legs are congruent. And isosceles trapezoid, the diagonals are congruent. Okay. Mid segment of a trapezoid, if we find the mid segment of both of the legs and we connect that, that's the mid segment. The mid segment is parallel to the two lines. Mid segment is also 1/2 the sum of the two bases. All right, let's talk about kites. Let's talk about kites. Now, we all know the shape of a kite, right? It looks like this. That's a kite. Now, what's the difference between a kite and, say, a rhombus? Well, a kite doesn't have all 4 side lengths the same. Okay? Kite has 2 pairs of congruent sides. Oh, I should do a different color. The kite has 2 pairs congruent side lengths. So this side equals this side, and this side equals this side. It also has, a kite has only 1 pair of opposite angles are congruent. Only 1 pair of opposite angles are congruent. So this is actually equal to this, but that is clearly different than that. This angle is much smaller than this angle. So only one pair of opposite angles are congruent. These are not congruent. So if both pairs are congruent, it's not a kite. It's actually probably a rhombus, and you've probably got all four side lengths are equal. Okay, and the last thing for a kite, I'm going to do it in green. The last thing for a kite is that the diagonals are perpendicular. The diagonals are perpendicular. So the diagonals are perpendicular for a kite. That is all you need to know to do tonight's homework. That what we did is we just gave you every theorem in this section. We just went through each theorem. The diagonals of an isosceles trapezoid are equal. The midsegment is half the sum of the two parts. It's also parallel to the two bases. The diagonals of a kite are perpendicular, and kite only has one pair of opposite angles that are the same. So, all right. Show the quadrilateral with the vertices 0, 3, 0, 6, negative 6, 0, and negative 3, 0 as a trapezoid. So you get to draw that trapezoid, and then you get to tell me why, in fact, it's a trapezoid. Exercise 2 and 3, find angle M, or the measure of angle K. So what I'd like you to do is make sure you please label what you're looking for. And how can I find it? Well, look at this. We have two side lengths that are the same. And these are the two parallel. So these are the bases. So these are the legs. So if I have legs equal, what does that tell me? Oh, equal legs. Look at that. Congruent legs. Trapezoid with congruent legs. So it's an isosceles trapezoid. So I know all these three things apply to this. And that's going to help me find my angles. All right. Right here I can see, oh look, this is the midsegment. Well, how do I know that? Well, because it's parallel to this one, parallel to this one. And it starts, this is equal to this, so that's the midpoint. This is equal to this, so that's the midpoint. So I know this is a midsegment. All right. Give those all a go. See how you do. And well, how about that? That's the last section for chapter 7. So enjoy, and please ask if you should have any questions.